First contact and ridicule. The gleaming halls of the Galactic Federation's Central Assembly fell silent as Dr. Sarah Chen walked to the podium. Her footsteps echoed against the crystalline floor, each step a reminder that she was the only organic being not housed in an environmental shell or cybernetic enhancement. The assembled representatives of over 300 species watched with what their various physiologies approximated as amusement. Distinguished members of the assembly, she began, her voice steady despite the weight of Earth's future resting on her shoulders. I come before you today as humanity's representative, seeking mutual exchange and cooperation. The arch-speaker, a being of pure energy contained within an ornic mechanical framework, flickered with what the translation matrix identified as condescension. We have reviewed your species application, Dr. Chen. While we acknowledge humanity's achievement in achieving faster-than-light travel, your civilization remains primitive by Federation standards. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. A representative of the Silicon consciousness, their crystalline form refracting light in complex patterns, projected their thoughts directly into the assembly's shared neural network. Their bodies are still purely organic. They haven't even begun basic genetic optimization or consciousness uploading. Sarah maintained her composure, though she could feel her heart racing. This wasn't going as planned. Earth's first contact with the Federation 3 months ago had been surprising enough. Finding out that humanity was considered barely more advanced than a pre-industrial civilization by galactic standards had been a shock. With respect, she continued, different doesn't necessarily mean primitive. Humanity has solved problems in ways that. You still use chemical rockets for planetary landing, interrupted a representative of the quantum collective, their probability cloud shifting in what Sarah had learned to recognize as derision. Your species hasn't even mastered basic gravity manipulation. Sarah opened her mouth to respond when the assembly's emergency alert system activated. The chamber's holographic displays filled with urgent data streams. A situation was developing in the Orion arm. As Sarah watched, the Federation representative's amusement turned to concern. The arch-speaker's energy form pulsed with urgency. We must adjourn this application review. A Class 1 threat has emerged in Sector 7249. But Sarah didn't move from the podium. Instead, she pulled up her own datapad. You mean the anomalies in the Betelgeuse sector? We've been tracking them too. This caught the Assembly's attention. Their monitoring systems were supposed to be undetectable. Impossible, the Silicon consciousness representative projected. Your sensors are far too primitive to. We didn't need advanced sensors, Sarah interrupted. We used math. Basic gravitational calculations and light spectrum analysis. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective. She paused, letting that sink in. And we've not only tracked them, we think we know what they are. More importantly, we might know how to stop them. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of electromagnetic signals, quantum fluctuations, and biochemical markers, the Federation equivalent of shocked whispers. The arch-speaker's energy form stabilized into a more focused configuration. Explain, it commanded. Sarah smiled slightly. Finally, they were listening. First, I need you to understand something about humanity. You see us as primitive because we haven't transformed ourselves into energy beings or uploaded our consciousness into machines. But there's a strength in our primitive state. We never stopped having to solve problems from first principles. While the Federation races evolved beyond what you call crude physical solutions, we humans kept perfecting them. She interfaced her datapad with the chamber's holographic systems, bringing up a series of calculations and observations. These entities you're tracking, we call them void weavers. They're not just consuming matter. They're weaving space-time itself into their structure. That's why your energy weapons and quantum disruptors aren't working. You're trying to fight them on a level they've evolved to manipulate. The Silicon consciousness representative's crystalline structure vibrated with skepticism, and you believe your primitive understanding offers a solution where our advanced science does not. Sometimes, Sarah said, you need to think inside the box. She brought up another diagram. We don't need to match their mastery of higher dimensions. We just need to disrupt the basic physical forces holding their structure together. Like using a stone to break a window. It doesn't matter how advanced the window is if you hit it with enough kinetic force at the right point. As the assembly processed this, Sarah could see the shift in their various forms of expression. The dismissal was giving way to something else. Curiosity, and perhaps a glimmer of respect. She had their attention now, but what she was about to propose next would either earn humanity a place among the stars or confirm their reputation as primitives forever. The Archspeaker's energy form pulsed with what the translation matrix struggled to interpret. Continue, Dr. Chen. Tell us more about this primitive solution of yours. Sarah took a deep breath. It was time to show the galaxy that sometimes the old ways were the best ways. And humanity. They were masters of the old ways. The crystalline threat. The Void Weavers struck 3 more systems in the time it took the Federation Assembly to convene their emergency session. Dr. Chen stood at a different podium now, surrounded by holographic displays showing the devastation. The crystalline entities had grown to the size of small moons, their fractal structures absorbing everything in their path. Planets, stars, even the fabric of space itself. The Centauri cluster is gone, announced the Quantum Collective's representative, their probability cloud condensed with distress. 8 billion sentients, just gone. The assembly chamber, usually alive with the electromagnetic chatter of hundreds of advanced species, fell silent. Sarah watched the latest footage, her mind racing. Where the Federation saw only horror, she saw patterns. The Void Weaver's crystalline structure wasn't random. It followed rules, basic physical principles that even humanity's primitive science could understand. The Archspeaker's energy form pulsed erratically. Our quantum disruption fields had no effect. The silicon consciousness attempts at communication have failed. Even the temporal syndicate's causality weapons barely slow them down. Because you're fighting them like your advanced species, Sarah interjected, earning her looks of confusion from the assembly. She stepped forward, manipulating the holographic display. Look at their growth pattern. It's not just consumption. It's crystallization on a cosmic scale. The silicon consciousness representative's form shimmered with interest. Explain. Sarah highlighted sections of the footage. These entities aren't just eating systems, they're converting them into extensions of their crystalline structure. It's like watching a supersaturated solution crystallize, just on an astronomical scale. And that gives us a weakness to exploit. What weakness? The Quantum Collective's representative shifted closer, their probability cloud showing signs of focused attention. Crystal growth follows basic physical laws, Sarah explained, bringing up a new simulation. No matter how advanced these entities are, they can't break the fundamental rules of molecular organization. We don't need to match their power. We just need to disrupt their growth pattern at the molecular level. The assembly erupted in a cascade of electromagnetic signals and quantum fluctuations, their equivalent of heated discussion. The Archspeaker's energy form stabilized into a tight pattern. You propose to fight a threat that devours star systems with chemistry. Exactly. Sarah smiled. While the Federation races evolved beyond physical sciences, humanity kept perfecting them. We've spent centuries understanding how matter behaves at its most basic level. Sometimes the simplest solution is the most effective. She brought up another display, this one showing molecular diagrams. We've developed a compound that targets the specific atomic bonds these creatures use to grow. It's not elegant or advanced. It's the equivalent of throwing sand into a machine. But sometimes that's all you need. The silicon consciousness representative vibrated skeptically. Your species still relies on chemical weapons. Such methods were abandoned eons ago as crude and inefficient. Crude, yes, Sarah acknowledged. But against an enemy that's evolved defenses against every advanced weapon in the galaxy, crude might be exactly what we need. The Void Weavers have adapted to quantum disruption. temporal manipulation, and even consciousness attacks. But I bet they've never faced good old-fashioned molecular sabotage. She could see the shift in the assembly's various forms of expression, from dismissal to desperate consideration. The Federation's mighty civilization, with all its advanced technology, had been humbled by these crystalline entities, and now they were being offered a solution by the very species they had dismissed as primitive. The Archspeaker's energy form pulsed with what might have been reluctant acceptance. "What do you propose, Dr. Chen?" Sarah's expression turned serious. "Let us modify one of our primitive chemical dispersal systems to deliver the compound. If I'm right, we can disrupt their molecular structure faster than they can adapt. If I'm wrong." She gestured at the displays showing more systems falling to the Void Weavers. "Well, we're running out of options anyway." The assembly chamber filled with the equivalent of murmured discussions. The Federation races were facing an enemy their advanced technology couldn't defeat, and their best hope might lie in the primitive solutions they had long since abandoned. The Archspeaker's form flickered with decision. "Very well, Dr. Chen. You have the Assembly's authorization to proceed with your primitive solution. But be warned, if this fails, there may not be time for another attempt." Sarah nodded grimly. "Then let's hope the old ways still have something to teach the new ones. Human innovation." The research facility on Europa's deep-sea floor wasn't anything like the Federation's quantum laboratories. No probability manipulation chambers or consciousness accelerators. Just good old-fashioned chemical labs, pressure chambers, and a team of human scientists who refused to give up. Dr. Chen stood before a reinforced observation window, watching as robotic arms manipulated a crystal sample retrieved from the outer edge of a Void Weaver's destruction zone. Next to her, Dr. James Rodriguez, Earth's leading crystallographer, adjusted his readings. "It's beautiful, in a terrifying sort of way," James muttered, studying the fractals that seemed to extend infinitely inward. "The complexity of their structure, it's like they're writing their own physics as they grow." Sarah nodded, checking the latest simulation results. "But they can't break the fundamental rules completely. That's our way in." She turned to the third member of their core team, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, who was busy programming the molecular assemblers. "How's the latest batch looking, Yuki?" The quantum chemist didn't look up from her work. "Batch 247 shows promise. We've modified the molecular structure to match the exact inverse of their crystalline pattern. In theory, it should propagate through their structure like—" She paused, searching for the right analogy. "Like a virus," James finished. "Or more accurately, like an anti-crystal." Sarah smiled grimly. "The Federation thinks we're primitive because we still work with physical matter instead of pure energy or quantum states. But that's exactly why we might succeed where they failed. We never stopped learning how to fight the old fights." The facility's alert system pinged. Another Void Weaver had been detected, this one heading toward the Proxima Centauri system. They were running out of time. "The Federation's quantum barriers will only hold them for so long," Sarah reminded her team. "We need to." She was interrupted by a sudden change in the crystal sample. Under the molecular assembler's precise control, their latest compound was being introduced to the alien crystal structure. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, like ice cracking under pressure, lines began appearing in the sample's perfect fractals. "Look at this!" Yuki exclaimed, pulling up the molecular scans. "The compound isn't just disrupting their structure. It's using their own growth patterns against them. It's like throwing a handful of sand into a perfect crystallization process." James leaned closer to the observation window. "It's not just stopping the growth, it's reversing it. The crystal is trying to maintain its pattern, but our compound is forcing it to follow normal physics instead of their twisted version." Sarah felt her heart race. This could be it. The breakthrough they needed. How fast does it propagate? Yuki's fingers flew over her controls. "At this scale, complete disruption in under 3 minutes, if we can maintain the same ratio at larger scales. We could destroy a Void Weaver before it could adapt, Sarah finished. She activated her quantum comm link to the Federation assembly. This is Dr. Chen. We're ready for a full-scale test. The Archspeaker's response came immediately, their energy form pulsing with urgency through the holographic display. You're certain, Dr. Chen. The Federation has committed significant resources to containing a juvenile Void Weaver in the Kuiper Belt for your test. We cannot maintain the quantum barriers indefinitely. Sarah looked at her team, saw the determination in their eyes. Humanity had been dismissed as primitive, but their understanding of basic physical sciences might be the galaxy's last hope. We're certain, she replied. Sometimes the most elegant solution is the simplest one. We're ready to demonstrate. The assembly chamber's collective response carried tones of both desperate hope and lingering skepticism. Very well. The test is authorized. But be warned, if this fails, the juvenile will join its brethren, and Earth's solar system will likely be their next target. Sarah ended the transmission and turned to her team. No pressure, right? James managed a tight smile as he began the preparations for scaling up their compound production. Just another day of saving the galaxy with primitive science. Yuki was already programming the delivery system, a modified ice mining drone that would inject their compound directly into the Void Weaver structure. The Federation's going to have to revise their definition of advanced after this. Sarah watched as their primitive solution was loaded into equally primitive delivery vessels. The Federation had evolved beyond physical sciences, seeing them as crude and beneath their advanced consciousness. But in doing so, they'd forgotten something crucial. Sometimes you needed to fight fire with fire, or in this case, crystals with crystals. Begin final preparations, she ordered. Let's show the galaxy what humanity's primitive science can do. The test. The juvenile Void Weaver hung suspended in space at the edge of the Kuiper Belt, contained within the Federation's quantum barriers. Even at this early stage of its development, it was massive, roughly the size of Earth's moon. Its crystalline structure pulsed with otherworldly energy, fractals growing and shifting as it tested the barriers holding it in place. Dr. Chen watched from the bridge of the Earth vessel Copernicus, a retrofitted mining ship that now carried humanity's best hope for survival. The Federation's mighty warships surrounded them, their advanced weapons trained on the creature in case the barriers failed. Quantum barrier integrity at 64% and falling, announced the Silicon Consciousness representative through the ship's comm system. You have approximately 20 minutes before containment fails. Sarah nodded to her team. James and Yuki were at their stations, monitoring the delivery systems they'd modified from mining equipment. Begin deployment sequence. The Copernicus shuddered as its cargo bay doors opened. 3 modified mining drones emerged, each carrying a payload of their crystal-disrupting compound. They looked absurdly small against the backdrop of the Federation's sleek warships and the massive crystalline entity they were meant to destroy. Primitive weapons for a primitive species, came a thought broadcast from one of the Federation observers. Sarah ignored it, focusing on the task at hand. Drones are in position, James reported, targeting optimal injection points based on our structural analysis. The Void Weaver seemed to sense their presence. Its crystalline surface rippled, new growth patterns emerging as it prepared to defend itself. The quantum barriers flickered ominously. Barrier integrity at 51%, came another update. The creature's attempts to break free are accelerating. Sarah took a deep breath. Launch. The drones accelerated toward their targets, their simple chemical engines a stark contrast to the quantum drives of the Federation ships. The Void Weaver's surface began to glow with strange energy. Energy spike detected. Yuki called out. It's trying to adapt. Stay on target, Sarah ordered. Remember, it's expecting advanced weapons. It won't be prepared for something this basic. The first drone reached its injection point, just as the creature released a burst of space-time warping energy. The Federation ships reeled from the assault, their quantum shields flaring. But the simple mining drone, hardened against nothing more exotic than radiation and micrometeorites, passed through unaffected. Impact, James shouted. First payload delivering. Now. Through the view screen, Sarah watched as their compound made contact with the Void Weaver's structure. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, like cracks spreading through ice, lines began appearing in the creature's perfect crystalline surface. It's working, Yuki exclaimed. The compound is propagating through its structure, forcing normal physics reassertion. The second and third drones struck their targets before the Void Weaver could react. More cracks appeared, spreading and connecting. The creature's attempts to adapt came too late. Its own growth patterns were being used against it, carrying the disrupting compound deeper into its structure. Fascinating, the silicon consciousness representative transmitted. The creature's attempts to maintain its altered physics state are actually accelerating the breakdown process. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Sometimes the simplest solution is the best one. It evolved defenses against quantum weapons and consciousness attacks, but it never needed to defend against basic chemistry. The Void Weaver's structure was collapsing now, its complex fractals breaking down into simple molecular structures that quickly dispersed into space. In less than 10 minutes, the mighty entity had been reduced to a cloud of inert crystals. Silence filled the command channel as the Federation observers processed what they'd just witnessed. Their most advanced weapons had failed, but humanity's primitive solution had worked perfectly. The Archspeaker's energy form manifested in their holographic communicator. Dr. Chen, your solution appears to have exceeded expectations. The Assembly will want a full report. Of course, Sarah replied. We'll need to begin mass production immediately. The adult Void Weavers will be more challenging, but the principle remains the same. Indeed, the Archspeaker's form flickered with what might have been embarrassment. It seems we may have been hasty in our dismissal of humanity's scientific approaches. We never stopped solving problems the old way, Sarah explained. While the Federation races evolved beyond physical sciences, we kept perfecting them. Sometimes you need to step backward to move forward. As the Copernicus prepared to return to Earth, Sarah watched the dissipating crystal cloud through the view screen. Humanity had just proven itself to the galaxy not through advanced technology, but through their mastery of fundamental principles. Sometimes being primitive wasn't a weakness, it was a strength. Respect earned. 6 months after the successful test, the Galactic Federation's Central Assembly looked very different. Human representatives now sat among the advanced species, their primitive environmental suits a stark contrast to the energy forms and quantum shells around them. But no one was laughing anymore. Dr. Sarah Chen stood at the same podium where she'd first been dismissed, but this time she was presenting the final results of Operation Crystal Break. The holographic displays showed the statistics. 37 adult Void Weavers neutralized, countless systems saved, and 0 failures of the human-developed compound. The threat has been contained, she concluded. The remaining Void Weavers have begun retreating from Federation space. Our tracking systems suggest they're returning to whatever dimension they originally came from. An unprecedented success. The Archspeaker's energy form pulsed with genuine respect. You've done more than save countless lives, Dr. Chen. You've taught the Federation a valuable lesson about the nature of true advancement. The silicon consciousness representative's crystalline form shimmered in agreement. We had forgotten the fundamental principles in our rush to transcend them. In doing so, we became vulnerable to threats that could only be fought on a basic level. Sarah nodded. Every level of science has its place. The Federation's advanced technology is remarkable, but there's also power in understanding and mastering the fundamentals. Humanity never stopped learning the old ways because we never saw them as beneath us. The assembly chamber hummed with electromagnetic acknowledgement. The Federation races had evolved beyond physical form, beyond traditional science, but they'd lost something in the process. Humanity, with their primitive organic bodies and crude chemical weapons, had preserved knowledge that proved invaluable. The Federation Council has reached a unanimous decision, the Archspeaker announced. Earth is to be granted full membership status, with all rights and privileges thereof. Furthermore, we propose the establishment of a new division within the Federation Science Council, the Department of Fundamental Sciences, to be headed by humanity. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The same beings who had once dismissed humans as barely worthy of notice were now acknowledging them as equals, even leaders in their own right. "We accept," Sarah replied, "on one condition." She paused, looking around the chamber. The Federation must remember this lesson. True advancement isn't about abandoning the old ways for the new. It's about understanding when each approach has value. The Quantum Collective's representative shifted their probability cloud in what Sarah had learned to recognize as thoughtful agreement. Perhaps this is why the universe guided us to discover humanity when we did. We had become over-specialized, too focused on advancement for its own sake. "Every species in this chamber has something unique to offer," Sarah said. "The Federation's strength should come from our diversity of approaches, not from all of us trying to evolve in the same direction." As the assembly moved on to discussing the practical details of Earth's integration into the Federation, Sarah found herself approached by a young Federation researcher, one of the few who still maintained a partially physical form. "Dr. Chen," they said, their voice carrying harmonics of curiosity, "I've been studying your species' scientific archives. Your primitive sciences. They're beautiful in their elegance. Would you be willing to teach me?" Sarah smiled. This, she realized, was the real victory. Not just saving the galaxy from the Void Weavers, but opening up a dialogue between the old ways and the new. Humanity hadn't just earned respect. They'd helped the Federation remember something it had lost. "Of course," she replied. "Let's start with the basics. Sometimes, the simplest principles are the most powerful." As she began explaining fundamental chemistry to the eager researcher, Sarah thought about humanity's journey. They'd gone from being dismissed as primitives to being recognized as keepers of essential knowledge. The galaxy was changing, and humanity's primitive wisdom would help shape its future. In the end, it wasn't about being the most advanced species. It was about understanding that true wisdom meant knowing when to look forward and when to remember what you'd left behind. The Federation had evolved beyond the physical realm, but humanity had reminded them that every layer of existence had its own kind of power. Together, they would build a stronger galaxy, one that valued all forms of knowledge, from the quantum to the chemical, from the transcendent to the fundamental. Sometimes, the old ways were the best ways, and humanity, they were masters of remembering what others had forgotten.